Representative Stevenson, welcome to the committee, and being you are not on this committee, I will move your bill for you. So I move that House File 35 be re-referred to the General Register. So Representative Stevenson, thank you, and with that, you can proceed with presenting your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This is a relatively straightforward bill to correct a 20-year error, in my view, in which we have included inflation on one side of our budget forecasting, but not the other side. And I just want you to imagine if you were a family engaged in the kind of forecasting and budgeting that we have been doing for 20 years at the state, what would happen. If you had started the year in 2022, sitting at the family table thinking about how you were putting your family budget together, and you assumed that you would get a salary increase commensurate with inflation, but also assumed that everything else that you were spending money on in your family budget, your food, your energy, your housing, would all remain the same cost throughout the year of 2022. By the time you got to December, you would be in a world of pain because, as we know, inflation has really real impacts on our budgets. So what this bill is about is honest accounting, reflecting inflation on both sides of the budget forecast, and getting rid of the kind of budgetary gimmicks that Minnesotans really don't like. A couple of sort of, I don't want to call them technical notes, but things that I think are important to highlight. First, there is a fiscal note attached to this bill of some significance. It reflects $1.5 billion in the upcoming biennium and $3.3 in the tails. But I want to note that that is just simply reflecting the impact on the projected surplus on once you account for inflation. This bill doesn't actually cost us anything, nor does it appropriate any money, and that's reflected in the fiscal note. There's no administrative cost to this bill. The fiscal note just reflects that if we adopted this methodology, that the November forecast would have reflected a budget surplus that was, roughly $1.5 billion less in the upcoming biennium and roughly $3.3 billion less in the tails. The other thing is that I think it's really important to note that this is a forward-looking bill. That is that we're really looking at adding inflation, accounting for the inflation that will occur in fiscal years 24 and 25, and not accounting for the impact on our budget for the inflation that occurred in 2022, 2023, and prior years, which is not incorporated into our forecasts, and that chairs will have to think about as they are making their budgetary decisions going forward. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Representative Stevenson. Representative O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering if you could give us a little bit of a history as far as why this hasn't been included in the past, or if it had been, 20, 30 years ago before we were all here. Well, most of us. There's a member or two here that might have been. But if that change had happened, and if so, if it hadn't happened, why we're looking at doing it now where we hadn't done it in the past?
Representative Stevenson.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Representative O'Neill. Well, when this change was adopted, when we excluded inflation from the budget forecast, I was a senior in high school wishing that I had the kind of deployable skills that Representative Pawlowski is going to make sure that I have going forward in life. My understanding, though, of the situation is that we had a budget deficit. We were in a period of sort of the beginning of chronic budget deficits, and one way that we could make the numbers add up, particularly in the tails, was by removing inflation from the forecast on the expenditure side. And that's why I refer to it as a budgetary gimmick. Before that time period, for a decade before that time period, we did include inflation in the budget forecast. And I think it was a more honest way of looking at our budget.
Representative O'Neill. Representative Petersburg.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the author too. So I used to create budgets for the church. It's a large congregation as well. And one of the things when we looked at expense budgets, we can do a couple of different things. One is the budget is about how much we spend, not necessarily about how much things cost. And so what you're suggesting is that we automatically build in how much things are going to cost rather than understanding that the budget reflects how much money we want to spend. And what a budget does is it determines that if we're going to spend say $100,000 on a particular project, if the costs come in, we got to find ways of reducing that. Not necessarily that we automatically increase that budget, because that then takes away kind of the responsibility of those that oversee the budget and those that actually propose the budget as to how they are going to be looking at savings in those particular areas. And so I think your initial discussion about how it's not proper for us to say, hey, things are going to cost more, so therefore we got to automatically increase the budget in order to do that is probably a little bit one-sided and doesn't take into the effect the responsibility of those that are setting that particular budget to understand it. So I'm just saying, I think that's something that you maybe overlooked. Thank you.
Representative Stevenson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Petersburg. Well, I think it's important to clarify the difference between a budget and a forecast. And what we're talking about today is putting it into the forecast document. It doesn't spend any money, so there's no automatic increase in spending. What we're trying to look at is if we want to continue doing what we've been doing for the last 2 years, and maybe we don't, but that's the forecast. If we're going to continue on the same path, this is how much it would cost. And that way we can make an honest decision, and we can look at, do we want to continue spending that? But the forecast doesn't appropriate any dollars. It is not a budget. That is what the legislature does. MMB gives us a projection that allows us to, informs our decision making here. And I think it should be an honest projection that accounts for all of the economic variables. I'm not aware of any business or church that would look at a year going forward as they're going through their budgetary process and just say, we're going to assume for the next year that everything's going to cost the exact same. And as I said at the outset, if you did that, you'd end up in a lot of trouble. You really need to account for inflation when you're making these decisions, and our forecast documents, which give us the information upon which we build our budget, should reflect the very real reality of inflation.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you. I'm not going to belabor the point. I'm just saying that we have gotten to the point where forecasts oftentimes reflect budget. And so to say that we aren't going to use it for a budget basis, I think is maybe a little bit directly unrelated to what actually happens. Thank you.
Further discussion. Representative Garofalo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And while I disagree with the bill, I do think Representative Stevenson is right when he says that this bill doesn't spend any money. It's just a matter of what you use for baseline assumptions. If you're somebody who wants to assume that you want to put your thumb on the scale to have government spend more money or make more investments or grow more, then you should vote in favor of Representative Stevenson's bill. If you're someone who wants to have a more skeptical budget eye towards things and you want to approve things on a dollar-by-dollar basis, then you should oppose Representative Stevenson's bill. But I do think if you look at the, and again, Representative Stevenson laid this out in the fiscal note that even though there's dollars listed, that money is not appropriated, right? It's not actually given. But if you want to know why DFLers tend to be in favor of this, take a look at what the estimates are in the biennial total. Fiscal years 24 and 25, there's a $1.5 billion increase in a presumed increase in spending. The next 2 years, there's an increase of $3.3 billion. Now, how does that make any sense when we see that our economic forecasts for projected rates of inflation are actually flat going forward? And it's because what it does is it puts a presumption of spending, a presumption of increasing, and if that's what you want, then that's what you should vote for. Again, that's not what I believe in, and I would ask people to vote no on the bill. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to say that, you know, the opposite of that also pertains here, which is that I, for example, for years have felt that when we do the way we do our forecasts misleads Minnesotans and makes them think that we have more so-called extra money than we really do. So if you want to be pretending that you're actually funding things and making it possible for all the areas that we fund to actually do the things we want them to do and keep doing that, and pretend that we're not really shorting them and asking them to do more with less, then vote no. But if you want to be honest, I think as Representative Stevenson was saying, I think this is a very important, very reasonable bill, and I would ask everyone to vote for it. Thank you.
Final word to your bill, Representative Stevenson.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, for considering the bill. I just do want to stress that if this bill passed, the legislature will still have to budget on a dollar-by-dollar basis. This does not appropriate any money, and scrutiny can and should be placed by the legislature on every single appropriation and this bill doesn't change that. It's just making sure we start with information that is honest and accurate, and so I ask for a yes vote.
Thank you. So with that, I renew the motion that House File 35 be re-referred to the General Register. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay.
No.
The motion prevails, and House File 35 is re-referred to the General Register.